Welcome back. Last time, where we had left off, Britain had become a vassal of Rome and had converted to Christianity, following the example of King Lucius. The years of his reign were prosperous. However, he did not have any children, and so there was no heir to take over upon his death. Instead, the realm fell into chaos, with different nobles claiming the throne for themselves. When word of this reached Rome, the Emperor Severus, along with 2 Roman legions, travelled to restore order to the island. When Severus landed, he did battle with the local Britons, and was victorious. However, he showed them little mercy, and slaughtered them in great numbers. He repeated this several times, as he gradually brought the kingdom under Roman rule. Many Britons sought independence from Rome, and they fled north to the lands of Duke Fulgenius of Albany, who was organising a resistance against the Romans. Severus marched against Fulgenius, but was unable to defeat him. In retaliation, Fulgenius launched regular raids against Severus's forces. Seeking to put a stop to this, Severus ordered the construction of a large wall from coast to coast to block off Albany from the rest of the island. Indignant at this, Fulgenius sought the support of the local Picts in the mountains, and together they marched south, breaching the walls and laying siege to York. Severus gathered the legions to him and travelled to face Fulgenius. The battle was fierce, with many losses on both sides. Eventually, Fulgenius was slain, and his forces were routed. However, Severus was also greatly wounded from the fighting, and died not long later after the battle. He was buried in York. Severus left 2 sons to succeed him, Pausanias and Geta. Pausanias was born of a British mother, while Geta's mother was Roman. Therefore, the Britons wanted Pausanias to rule, whilst the Romans preferred Geta. The Britons declared Pausanias their leader, starting up a new war between the brothers. It was over quickly though, with Pausanias defeating his half-brother in battle and gaining control of the kingdom. Rather than continue fighting, the Romans decided that they would be willing to allow him to rule over Britain for the time being. After this, there was a sort of stability for a time on the island. However, in these years, the coastline began to be raided by various barbarian groups who came from Germania. In response to this, a young, ambitious youth, known as Carausius, travelled to Rome, where he requested that the Senate grant him some ships to defend the coast of Britain against the barbarians. The Senate approved of this, thinking that they could use Carausius to help them reassert Roman authority over the islands. Carausius travelled back north and collected his ships, and gathered followers from among the Britons. Before long he had a fleet which was quickly put to work to stop the barbarians. But now, with that problem dealt with, he decided to launch raids of his own against other peoples, primarily the Irish. The raids were successful, he became very wealthy, and men flocked to support him in large numbers. When he made land, he declared to his supporters that if they helped him and made him king, then he would lead them to free Britain of the Romans once and for all. He had their support, and Carausius marched on London, seeking to depose Pausanias. Pausanias gathered around him an army of Britons and Picts, and moved out, intending to put an end to this upstart. When the armies met, a battle took place. However, Pausanias' Pictish warriors stayed back and did not join the fighting. Then they betrayed him, and charged into the rear of Pausanias' armies. You see, Carausius had secretly bribed the Picts with the promise of more land in Albany if they were to help him win the war. Pausanias was slain, and his army was routed, leaving Carausius to become king. He honoured his promise, and the Picts received more land. When news of Carausius' usurpation reached Rome, they dispatched the legate Eclectus, along with 3 Roman legions to retake the isle. Eclectus would arrive in Britain and do battle with Carausius. He was victorious, and Carausius was slain. However, then Eclectus began to pillage the land and execute the Britons in large numbers in order to punish them for trying to break away from Rome. However, this had the opposite effect, and a large number of Britons rallied around Asclepiodotus, the Duke of Cornwall, who they declared their new king. Asclepiodotus travelled with his new army and fought a battle against the Romans. He was victorious, and Eclectus was slain in the fighting. Following his victory, Asclepiodotus would rule for the next 10 years as king. During this time, the Emperor Diocletian would send his general Maximian Herculius to invade Britain. The fighting between Herculius and Asclepiodotus raged on for several years, with neither of them securing a solid degree of control over the island. At the same time, Diocletian was also not a fan of Christianity, and so on the Emperor's orders, Herculius executed any Christians he came across on the isle, as well as destroying all the churches he came across. Eventually, Cole, the Duke of Caercolvin, had had enough of the constant war, and rose in a rebellion against Asclepiodotus. He defeated the king in the pitched battle, and then set the crown of the kingdom upon his own head. Whilst this was going on, Herculius had retired back to Rome, with the legate Constantius being sent in his stead to carry on the war on Rome's behalf. As soon as Constantius arrived on the isle, he received the messages from King Cole requesting peace. Cole wanted peace, promising that he would pledge fealty to Rome. on the condition that he could retain the Kingdom of Britain and that he would not have to pay more than the traditional tribute that previous British kings had paid to Rome. Constantius agreed, and so the war was ended. However, but a mere month later, Cole was struck by a sudden illness and died. After this, Constantius took the crown upon himself and married Helena, the daughter of Cole, in order to secure his legitimacy. Constantius ruled in peace for the rest of his years, and he had a son with Helena, who was named Constantine. After Constantius died, he was buried in York, and Constantine took the throne. Constantine quickly became known as an extremely capable and skilled leader, and was widely respected throughout the empire. Now at this time, Rome was ruled over by a tyrant called Maximian, who was hated by the people due to his oppression of them. Many fled north to Britain to escape his wrath. There they begged Constantine to come and help them, and aid their fight against Maximian in order to liberate Rome. Constantine decided to fulfill their request. He raised an army and marched on Rome. With him was the uncle of Helena, known as Traherne, who he intended to raise to be a senator. When Constantine reached Rome, he fought a battle against Maximian, which he won decisively and was declared emperor. Meanwhile, back in Britain, the ambitious Duke of Weassy, Octavius, raised a rebellion against Constantine and declared himself king. Upon hearing the news, Constantine sent Traherne, along with 3 Roman legions, to recover the isle. Traherne made land at Caparis and began to assault the city. After 2 days, the city fell, and Traherne marched north with his armies. Octavius had also gathered his forces, and travelled south from Winchester to face Traherne. The battle went decisively in Octavius' favour, and Traherne was forced to retreat back to his ships. Rather than give up and return to Gaul, though, Traherne sailed his ships around the coast and headed north, where he landed in Albany and began to ravage the land. Once Octavius realised what had happened, he marched his forces north, and once again faced Traherne in battle. This time, though, it was Octavius who was to be defeated. Traherne aggressively pursued Octavius after the battle, giving him no opportunity to recover and reorganise his forces. Instead, the rebel king opted to flee the country, securing a ship and sailing over to Norway, where he hoped to acquire the support of the Norwegian king Gombert. Whilst there, he contacted in secret one of the earls still loyal to him in Britain with a request. The earl gathered 100 of his men and set an ambush in the forest outside London, which Traherne regularly passed through. Traherne did exactly that, and the trap was sprung on him. He was slain. Once Octavius got news of the successful assassination, he returned to Britain and ruled as king once more. Octavius would rule at peace for the next few years, but as he grew old, he became concerned about who would succeed him after his death, as he only had one daughter. To resolve this, he summoned the nobles of the realm to a grand council, where they would discuss it. There was much debate, with some nobles favouring the king's nephew, Conan Meriadoc, for the throne. However, Caradoc, the Duke of Cornwall, suggested they should invite the Roman senator, Maximian, to rule. The man was a close relative of Constantine, and he had a number of ancestors from Britain. Caradoc said that Maximian could marry the king's daughter, and this would ensure a lasting peace between Rome and Britain. Conan, who desired the throne, disagreed with this, and so debates raged on for weeks. Caradoc grew frustrated with the proceedings, and so sent a messenger to Rome to contact Maximian. When Maximian received the news, he seized the opportunity. The new emperors of Rome, Gratian and Valentinian, both disliked Maximian, and had made him a social outcast in their society. Therefore, he set forth from Rome and began travelling north with a retinue of soldiers. On the way, he crossed into the lands of the Franks, where he sacked some towns to gather gold and silver to pay his men and grow his forces. Then he crossed the Channel. However, to his dismay, there was an army led by Conan waiting for him upon his arrival. Knowing he would struggle in a pitched battle, Maximian chose a different approach. He informed Conan that it was in fact here to act as an envoy from the emperors Gratian and Valentinian. Conan was still suspicious of this due to the size of the retinue that Maximian had brought with him. Maximian explained that it was because of the past conflicts between the Britons and the Romans, and he feared for his life passing through Britain if he did not have his guards with him. Conan was still distrusting of Maximian, but then Caradoc and some other nobles criticised him and warned him that if he attacked the Roman envoy, it would spark a new war. And so Conan allowed Maximian to pass and escorted the Roman to London, where he was presented before the king. Once there, Caradoc gave a speech to the king, explaining the heritage of Maximian and making the case for him to be the heir to the throne. King Octavius agreed with the speech, and Maximian was made heir, and was married to the king's daughter. When Conan got word of this, he was furious, and travelled north to Albany, where he gathered an army, intent on rebellion. Maximian, in turn, organised his own forces, and marched north to face Conan. There were several battles which were fought, some won by Maximian, some won by Conan. neither would gain a major advantage. Eventually, friends of both men got fed up with the war and persuaded them to agree to a peace. During this time, Octavius died, and Maximian became king fully. After ruling for 5 years of peace, the wealth of the realm had grown significantly, and Maximian decided to put it to use. Rome had been in a state of chaos over the last few years, and its influence in Gaul had greatly diminished. Therefore, Maximian decided to take the lands for himself. After gathering a vast army and building a large fleet of ships, he crossed the Channel and invaded the Gallic dukedom of Armorica. The Gauls, led by Duke Inbold, did battle against him, but were utterly crushed. After the battle, Maximian brought Conan before him and made him the new Duke of Armorica. Conan swore that he would be a loyal vassal under the king, and they agreed that they were to transform this new land into another Britain. A large number of people were brought over from Britain and settled the newly conquered land. After this, Maximian moved on to the other realms of Gaul and started conquering dukedom after dukedom and sacking city after city. Eventually, he managed to subdue all the realms of Gaul. He even expanded into Germania. This was where he halted his conquest. He intended to settle all the lands of Gaul with Britons in order to secure his rule before moving onwards. However, he remembered his times in Rome, at the mercy of the two emperors, and sought revenge. Maximian marched his army south into Italy, leaving a small detachment with Conan, who was tasked with putting down some rebellions which had arisen in Gaul. Whilst this was going on, Maximian also decided to reward the thousands of soldiers who had been serving under him by giving them wives. He did not want to mix them with the local women of the lands he had conquered, so he instead sent a messenger on to Dionytus, the son of Carausius, who was the new Duke of Cornwall. Dionytus was instructed to gather the unmarried women of the realm and send them to the continent, where they would be married to the soldiers of Maximian's army. He did exactly that, gathering up 11,000 daughters of nobles of the realm and 60,000 from the commoners. The women were brought to London, where they were loaded onto ships. The ships set sail. Just as they were approaching the shores of Armorica, a great storm arose, and the ships were scattered in all directions. Many sank, wherever some ended up drifting ashore on the lands of the barbarians in the east, where the women were enslaved. In particular, they were captured by two men, King Guianus of the Huns and King Melgar of the Picts. When these men learned that Britain had been emptied of soldiers by Maximian due to his wars in the south, they saw a great opportunity. They both set sail, with Melgar also making an alliance with the Picts already on the isle, and soon the large armies of the barbarians landed, intent on conquering the isle. In the south, Maximian's forces had been depleted from fighting the Romans, although he had managed to slay one of the emperors. When he got news of what was happening in Britain, he sent one of his generals, Gratian de Burgus, north, along with what men he could spare. In the following weeks, Maximian's remaining forces would suffer a great defeat at the hands of the Romans, and he ended up dying in battle. The remnants of his army were scattered, and eventually would travel to Armorica, where they would settle the land and be ruled under Conan. Meanwhile, back in Britain, Gratian de Burgus had arrived and did battle with the barbarians. He was victorious and managed to drive the Huns into Hibernia and the Picts north. With most of the forces of the Britons lost in Italy, they now found themselves in a precarious position, particularly now, with more armies of barbarians in the east seeing Britain as a possible area of expansion. Next time, we shall see how they fare against these new challenges. But until then, farewell.